Good afternoon, everyone. We're now in the second part of the book of Exodus. Chapter 21 onwards gives us a full detail of what's going to transpire after the Mount Sinai episode. In chapter 19, we are told that they saw the presence of God, the glory of God, and they were very afraid. And then in chapter 20, we have the giving of the 10 statements or the 10 commandments. Today, we begin a few chapters of a series of what we would call laws, rules, and regulations. It reads this way when we begin chapter 21. Chapter 21 says, "And these are the judgments which you shall set before them." These are the judgments which you shall set before them. A few things has to be clarified before we enter into these few chapters. First, we are told that it has to be placed before them, and we do have two particular views. One before the Israelites, and two judges. And so both Israelites and judges need to understand these chapters. It is also said that these are judgments. So I want us to bear in mind that in chapter 20, we have the first set regarding God and the second set regarding man. We begin chapter 21 onwards. It is a man to man relationship. And that applies to all human beings. The way that God has expressed himself in these few chapters is to explain what justice is all about. These are the judgments which serve as justice. And all Israelites and their judges need to execute justice, not just judgments. Judgments here, or mishpatim, really tells us that these are judgments that are just, judgments that provide for justice. What really justice mean is this: it is between two persons. One person is the aggressor, and the other person is a victim. The victim must be able to seek justice for what he has suffered. And hence, judgment here really means just judgments, which provides for justice that the Israelites and the judges must all know. Now, I don't know how much more I can say to underscore that justice and God being just is so important in the Bible. That is God's central character. Oftentimes, people tend to say, God is love. You don't find that statement in the Hebrew Bible. You find that God is just all through the Hebrew Bible. Why? Because in the interaction between human beings, justice is most important, not love. And the Hebrew form of love is very different from the modern explanation of love. And we will see how love is shown in justice. So, love is not a commanding character, but justice is a commanding character. Love is by the way, as a necessary part of the relationship, but justice is to be seen all across humanity. That in itself should help us understand this chapter and the chapters that follows. We continue to look at this chapter. In verse 2 onwards, it describes a series of laws and events that has to do with human beings, that has to do with financial implication, that has to do with the economy of the Israelites when they enter into the promised land. We must remember that when the Israelites enter into the promised land, they will be like any other nation. They would have to fend for themselves. They would have to buy and sell. They would have to live a life in a community. They have to plant. They have to do many things to keep the nation going and to feed the people. And hence, many things can go wrong when people are together. And in these few chapters, God wants them to see what true divine justice should be practiced amongst God's people. Now, other nations may or may not do some of these things, but God wants to highlight in these few chapters as part of the covenant that God is just. Hence, his people must be just. So it begins, if you buy a Hebrew servant, and I think we could use the word slave here. If we buy a Hebrew slave or servant, he shall serve for 6 years. The seventh, he shall go free and pay nothing. Now, you will begin to see that the divine justice for what we call slavery or servitude is nothing like how modern man has taken on slavery. Why is there slavery in the first place? So we talk about this. There are two particular forms of slavery. One is when the court has decided that you are to be sold, to pay up for what you have done. The second is that you voluntarily sell yourself, or the father sells the children into servitude. The difference of the servitude in the law of God is that to be just, the ownership of the servant is not forever and ever and passes down to the next generation. God says that this servitude is for 6 years and 6 years only. By the time the seventh year comes, he can leave. He doesn't have to pay any more. It means that the debt is removed by the seventh year. If he comes in by himself, meaning he is single, then he shall leave by himself. If he comes in married with his wife, then both his wife and him will leave. This is fair because when you came into servitude, you were single. Then you leave single. When you came into servitude married, then you leave with the wife that you came in with. If his master has given him a wife, and in this case, the wife would be a Canaanite wife, a non Hebrew wife, and she has borne him sons and daughters, the wife, which is the Canaanite servant, and her children shall be her masters, and he shall go by himself. What does that mean? It means this: he comes in by himself, he goes out by himself, even though he has a wife when he is in servitude. But it is important for fairness is that, but if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. What it means is this servant does not want to leave free and pay nothing. Why? Because he wants his obligation to be with his master, wife, the non Canaanite wife, and children. So it says here, I love my master. God is love, is not this kind of love. I love my master means I want to serve my master. He has treated me well, and I want to stay with him. I have a wife that was given by him. I have my children, and I want to support them. So I will not leave, and so the obligation will be further down the road. So his master shall bring him to the judges. Notice, judges are always involved. The judges will determine whether this servant is willingly doing it or is under duress. See, the master can always want to keep his servant, not willing to let him go for various reasons. And so, to be fair to the servant, the judges will decide. And then he shall also bring him to the doorpost, pierce his ear with an awl, something sharp, and he shall serve him forever. So when the judges have seen it, the servant is free to continue with the master. He is not a free man in the sense that he can go away. He is willing to serve the master because of his obligation to the master, the wife, and the children. We look at the next portion, verse 7. It says here, if a man sells his daughter, this would be a Hebrew man selling his daughter to be a female slave. Remember, 6 years and the seventh year go free. But look at this. She shall not go out as the male slaves do. The female slave has a different condition given to her, in the sense that this female slave may engage in an obligation that a male slave would not. So in verse 8, it says, if she does not please her master, who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. This is like a man marrying a woman, and if something happens that the woman has done something to disgrace the man can divorce the wife and send her back to the home. We read that in the book of Deuteronomy. But in this case, if the master takes the female slave, single girl, as a wife, but doesn't like her for some reason, it doesn't say what, but it does say that it is sufficient for the master not to want her to be a wife, then he shall let her be redeemed and go home to the parents. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people. For example, they cannot be like the brothers of Joseph to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites or the Midianites and then bring him to Egypt and sell him as a slave. The master who has wanted her to be a wife, but eventually did not go through with it, must let her go and be redeemed by the parents. He has no right, means she does not belong to him in a way where he can do whatever he wants. Remember, everything has to do with justice. It must be just for the female slave. It must be just for the master. It must be just for the parents. And so there is no right. For since he has dealt deceitfully with her, wanted to marry her, but made an excuse. And so God says, justice for the girl means she can be set free. Now, if he has betrothed her to his son, then he shall deal with her accordingly to the customs of the daughters, meaning, and a Hebrew daughter is given in hand to marry. It means that the son must take care of the female slave like a free woman. That is the condition. Now, if he, the master, takes another, now this is one of those occasions that you see that a man may have more than one wife. And so if he takes this female slave as a wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. What it means is that she, although being a slave, must still be taken care of like a wife by the master. If he does not do these three for her, these are three things: food, clothing, marriage rights, intimacy, right? If this is not done, then she shall go free without paying money. This means that it's like this: she is a free woman now. And so a female slave is treated slightly differently from a male slave. Verse 12. We now enter into another situation. It is about violence. It's about how man with man is dealt with when something goes wrong. What goes wrong? He who strikes a man and he dies shall surely be put to death. In the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. And because of that, you find that he who strikes a man is an intentional, and he dies. This is an intentional killing. Put to death means it's alive for alive. Verse 13. However, if he did not die, he did not lie in wait, he wasn't waiting to strike him, but God delivered him into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. Remember, this is the cities of refuge. This is unintentional. We have a difference between intentional and unintentional. A place where you may flee means that you are somewhat incarcerated. You can go home. You have taken a life. And so it is important for us to realize that, for example, when Moses struck an Egyptian, he wasn't going home. He was sent out 40 years in the wilderness to the land of Midian. So it was not intentional. It was something that God had delivered into his hand in defending his brother, but still a life was taken. And he can't go home free. He cannot pretend that everything is fine as if nothing happened. It doesn't matter whether it was an Egyptian's life or a Hebrew life. In the eyes of God, every life is made in the image of God. And there must be justice. That is what I've been trying to highlight. The justice. If Moses was a free man and could wander around in the courts of the Pharaoh, then it would not be just to the man who died. And so justice is served when Moses had to run away. So I will appoint for you a place of refuge, and that would come when they are in the promised land. In the case of Moses, for example, he ran away far away from the Egyptians so that he will stay there until he had a time to come back. And so he is incarcerated for a period of time. Verse 14. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, by finding a way to secretly harm him, then you shall take him from my altar that he may die. Is a life for a life. He who strikes his father and mother shall surely be put to death. The law is to honor. The law is not to strike. When you strike your father and mother, you are taking a position that you are greater than them. And in God's eyes, and this is an Eastern Oriental practice, that this person shouldn't even live. Why? Because he disrespected the hand that fed him, the womb that gave birth to him, and the very fact that he was alive was due to them. He is not fit to live. That is what it means here. So he will be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, sells him, or if he is found in his hand, he would be the man he kidnapped, then he shall be put to death. So God is giving laws with regard to justice. Kidnapping a person is to deprive the person of the freedom and perhaps his life. In that case, God considers kidnapping as serious as murder. Moreover, in verse 17, he who curses his father and mother. Now, 17, it says curses, is kalal. Curses means to treat as worthless. Again, striking, cursing is considered really severe and will be put to death because he is not honoring the womb that gave birth to him, the father who raised him. And so the idea of striking the father, cursing the father, has a penalty of death. It is important for us to realize then that whenever there is a death penalty associated, these are the situations where human beings, including ourselves, must pay very close attention to. Now, in Western civilization, this will be a bit difficult, but in Eastern civilization, honoring the father and mother is something that we grew up with. And God warns them, for whatever the reason, you strike your father and mother, or you curse them and treat them as worthless, then God says, I rather not have you as a human being. Verse 18. It says, if a man quarrel with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, but he doesn't die, but he is injured. If he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, even though he can't walk properly, then he who struck him shall be acquitted. Now, this word acquitted doesn't really mean acquitted. It literally means he will be healed. He who struck him shall be healed, meaning he doesn't have to suffer for it. He only have to pay for the loss of time that this person who didn't die, confined to his bed, can't work, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So from the time that he is injured to the time he can go back to work, this person is acquitted, but has to make sure that the injured person will have a form of life. This is justice. There is no such thing, say, I'm sorry, and you walk away. Everything in God's eyes, when justice is concerned, is about restitution. So let me write this down. Restitution. A paying back. It is important for us to realize saying sorry or being regretful is just one aspect, but restitution is justice. Because he can't work, who's going to take care of his family? And that is what it means. Verse 20. If a man beats his male or female servant with a rod. Now, understand this. In the ancient days, a master who have a slave can discipline the slave. And if he disciplines with a rod, and in such a way where he dies under his hand, he must be punished. This is justice. You cannot say, oh, he is my slave. In God's eyes, yes, he or she is your slave, but he or she is also made in the image of God. Remember, life is sacred. You must treat life sacredly, specially, because a man or a woman is made in the image of God. This is something that a lot of people struggle with, as if you own somebody and then you can do anything with that person. You can't. If that person dies, you must be punished because you have taken a life. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, fine. Then didn't die. He shall not be punished, for he is his property. A servant in this case is treated as property, meaning he has full ownership and the person is not dead. And so if the person is not dead, then the person will have to own up to God. But there is no penalty for that. Next, if men fight. Verse 22. The idea of fight here is to struggle with each other. The word fight is to struggle. Now, how do you struggle? You hang on with each other, you push and pull, and in so doing, you hurt a woman who is pregnant, woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely. Now, this idea is an accident. As you can see, this is an accident. But it has caused the woman to give birth. But no harm continues. She gave birth naturally. He shall be punished accordingly as to what the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. Now, what does that mean? It means this: the woman was put into shock and her labor was induced. The defender of the woman is the woman's man, the husband. And the husband will be able to determine what has happened to the wife and what is fair. And the judges will claim and apportion if it is exceeding what the judges think. But it is what the husband demands, but it is what the judges will decide what is justice. All right. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life. What does that mean? If the woman dies in labor because of this, if the child dies, then it's a life for life. You see, when God says you shall not murder, you shall not intentionally do that, then whether intentional or unintentional, the person doesn't go free. If it's unintentional, run to the cities of refuge. If it's intentional, then the person dies. So if harm follows the woman, yes, a life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. What this means is there must be an equivalence of penalty. That is justice. Equivalent of penalty means this. See, in our country today, if you happen to drive a car and You happen to run the red light. Well, it's an offense, nevertheless, but you don't have to die. You pay a fine that is commensurating to the offense that you have done. You can't be made to pay an offense like how somebody else would have stole a lot of money, but you just run the red light. That would not be fair. That would be justice. So God says, a life for a life. If you take a life, then you must pay a life. If you blind somebody in the eye, then literally you must be blinded in the eye, unless there is a ransom. A ransom means the court will decide, or the judges will decide, instead of injuring your hand or injuring your eye, what is the appropriate amount of restitution that one will have to pay so that the person who is a victim can be at peace. So it is not necessary that you need to literally cut off the other guy's arm, but there would be a restitution. You see that a bit later on. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, that he or she is now blinded in one eye, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. So this person does not need to serve the master because the master was negligent. Even though there is a male or female servant or slave, the person is still a human being and must be treated in a decent manner. But hurting the person's eye and blinding the person is good enough case to set the slave free so that he now needs to learn how to struggle with the remaining eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall set him free for the sake of his tooth. And so he lost a tooth, a very part of himself, then the master must let him go. And so these are what we call cases of justice, judgments which are just, and God is telling us what we should do. In our last part, we will deal with animals. Why are we talking about animals when we're talking about two human beings? Because an animal is owned by a human being. So in this case, it is not a wild animal. It is an animal that is owned by a human being. So we read this. If an ox gores a man or woman to death, so a life for a life would be the justice. The ox shall be stoned, put to death, its flesh not eaten, discarded, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. Now, 28, acquitted means to be innocent. But if the ox tended to thrust with his horn in times past, and it has been made known to his owner, and he has not kept it confined, meaning he has not done anything to prevent the incident, so that he has killed a man or a woman, well, the ox shall be stoned, that's for sure, but the owner shall be put to death. Why? Because the owner knowingly used the ox as a weapon for killing. That is how it should be understood. If there's an imposed on him a sum of money, and let me put this in a different color. If there's imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever is imposed him. Meaning this, an eye for an eye, the court can impose a sum of money. And that sum of money is deemed to be worthy of a hand or an eye or a limb. That the court will decide. Whether he has gored a son or a daughter according to this judgment, it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a female servant, He shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So, what does that mean? If the male servant or the female servant does not belong to this guy and gets hurt by an animal, then this owner must pay the restitution to the the owner of the slaves. So now we have owner dealing with owner. Because the ox had done something, then this owner who owns the ox must do restitution, but the ox is stoned. Next, if a man opens a pit, digs a pit, does not cover it, then you're inviting trouble. Somebody walks by, didn't see it, falls into a hole, and an ox and a donkey falls on it. Well, the ownership is on the whole owner, the guy who dug the pit. The owner of the pit shall make it good. Now, 34, make it good is shalem. Make good, meaning whatever is needed to be paid must be paid so that the owner will have no more claims. When there are no claims against each other, there is shalom. So, in order to get shalom, one must shalem, make it good, pay back everything, and he shall give the money to their owner, but the animal shall be his, right? Shall be his. Because he has paid restitution in kind or with money. 35. If one man's ox hurts another man's ox, the other ox dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it. The dead they also shall divide. So you should sell both the live and the dead. But if it was known that the ox intended to thrust in pastime, meaning there was a history of this ox trying to hurt people, then its owner has not kept it confined. It means that the owner has not prevented this problem. He shall surely pay ox for ox. The dead animal shall be his own. What does it mean, surely pay ox for ox? Well, if the ox fell into his pit, he should actually pay back by buying an ox. That is the principle in chapter 21. The justice of God must always be seen and be seen to be done. It is not only in concept, but in reality. What is important for us to realize is that it is not the rules that we see here, lots of them, but the principles behind the rules is this: life is sacred, don't take it. God has almighty judgments. God can judge. And so he is just and he expects man to be just. And all these laws that we are eventually going to finish in the next few chapters has to do with human interaction that all mankind must know and must be willing to submit to God. Because God's ways are the fairest ways that man can live in peace and harmony and provide justice in a way where everybody can see that justice is done. And so, with this, we come to the end of our session today.